If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at @fitnessmama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. Today I am chatting with a lovely member inside Fitness Mama, Emily, and Emily shares her birth story and recovery journey. So she had a beautiful, positive experience. However, she did develop a prolapse. So Emily describes her labour, her induction. She describes her birth, and it did have its complications, but she overall reported a beautiful, positive experience. And then we discussed the recovery aspect too with a prolapse. And Emily is now 5.5 months postpartum and feeling really positive about her future in terms of her recovery after a prolapse. So I trust you're really going to love this episode today. Before I do dive into this episode, I would love to invite you to come and join us inside Fitness Mama. If you would like to help prepare your body for birth, or if you would like to help with your after-birth recovery, including safeguarding yourself against prolapse as much as possible, or helping yourself recover after having a prolapse like Emily, then come and join us for a free 7-day trial. If reclaiming your pelvic floor, core and strength safely is important for you, then this is all available inside Fitness Mama. Perhaps you found you're not exercising as much as you'd like to. Perhaps you're finding you're busy and you don't have the time. Perhaps you're not sure about the best exercises for you, or you really want to get back into running after birth and you want the best kickstarter possible. Then join us for these convenient, short, easy workouts that you can do from the comfort of your home whilst your baba kicks around on the mat next to you, whilst your toddler runs around, or at the end of a long day at work. Head to fitnessmama.com and the link is in the show notes. Right, let's dive into this episode. Emily, thank you so much for joining me on the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. It's amazing to be able to chat to you about your birth story and your recovery journey in particular.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So you've got little Edith, who you're holding at the moment,
Yeah.
5.5 months old. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Let's take your journey back to the start. I believe you're an Australian. You're living in, is it London at the moment?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so I've lived in London since, I think, when did I move here? 2021. It was like the middle of the pandemic, so that was all a bit wild. But yeah, I've been here for a few years now.
What took you to London?
My husband is Scottish, so yeah, it's him.
Okay, so you get to London 2021 and do you decide pretty soon after that you're going to fall pregnant? Was this a planned pregnancy?
Yeah, it was definitely a planned pregnancy. We got married and a few months later decided we'd start trying to have a baby. So it took us, I think it was about 8 months before I fell pregnant for the first time. And that was Edith. Yeah. So it didn't it's a funny thing. I think like once you decide you want to have a baby, you want to be pregnant like yesterday, it's sort of, and you think it's going to happen quite quickly, but yeah, it did take a little bit of time.
Yeah. How were you feeling over those 8 months?
Yeah, I got quite fixated on the whole process for a while there. A friend recommended buying these ovulation strips. So I was just, convinced that I would be pregnant each month because, I felt like I was nailing the ovulation sort of timing. But actually it wasn't until I decided to just throw them all in the bin and just relaxed about the whole process a lot more. And then it did happen quite quickly after that. So yeah, so that was interesting.
And where were you when you found out you're pregnant?
Just at home in bed. With the ovulation strips came a lot of pregnancy tests in that same sort of box. So I just had a lot of them in the cupboard, and my period was due. And I normally would get quite a bit of spotting a few days before I would get my period, and I hadn't had that. So I just sort of thought I might just do a test just to see. And yeah, it was positive. So that was quite a nice moment, just hopping back into bed with my husband and telling him, yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, we were delighted. So, yeah.
And tell us about your pregnancy journey.
It was relatively straightforward other than, I had pretty awful morning sickness, no vomiting, just really bad nausea, like all day, every day until about 16 weeks. And I can remember it sort of started to ease off and then I started to get pelvic girdle pain. It was sort of like I went from, one thing straight into another. But to be honest, the pelvic girdle pain it felt quite intense to start off with, but I just started going to Pilates classes and that really seemed to manage it completely. I didn't really have any ongoing issues throughout pregnancy as long as I continued going to the Pilates classes. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's great to hear. Movement is medicine. It can really, if you're getting the right movement, it can really help.
Yeah.
So that's great to hear.
Yeah. So that was, the pregnancy sort of just sailed along pretty well after that.
And at what stage did you start to think, okay, birth's coming up? Like, did you start to think you needed to prepare for birth, or how did you approach childbirth?
Yeah, I think all through pregnancy it was definitely on my mind. I was a bit scared of giving birth. I feel like had I been back in Australia in the private system, I would have really considered having an elective cesarean because I was quite scared of the whole thought of it. But over here, you don't really have that option in the NHS. But yeah, anyway, towards the end, I wanted to give it a go anyway. I was really prepared to give birth a go. So I started to do a lot of research. I bought a ton of books. I did a hypnobirthing course online. And yeah, I was quite sort of focused on having a good experience. I guess I'd heard enough sort of traumatic stories. Yeah, so I was quite committed to educating myself on the different outcomes that could, just trying to educate myself.
So when you mentioned you were scared of giving birth, can we, what were you scared of in particular? Were there any particular thoughts running through your mind?
Yeah, I think I was scared of having sustaining an injury. I think that's where it was coming from. If I really think back, I'd heard plenty of stories. I think a lot of women like to sort of tell you I'm trying to think of the right way to put it, but I think if you think about sort of your mum and your mum's friends talking about birth, often it's sort of in a bit of a negative way in that, this really intense thing happens and you can tear. And I'd heard stories of incontinence and things like that. So I was just kind of afraid of what might happen and how that might impact me in the long term.
This episode is brought to you by Baby Bee, Australian-owned and designed prams combining quality, safety and style. Not only does Baby Bee let you try their prams at home with free returns for 9 months, yes, that's 9 months, they also offer an industry-leading 3-year warranty for total peace of mind. With thousands of 5-star reviews, around-the-clock customer care, and up to $300 of free accessories with every pram. What are you waiting for? Go visit www.babybonline.com and check them out for yourself. And yes, for listeners of the podcast, there is a 20% discount code. Enter FITBEE, FITBEE 20 at checkout, and T's and C's apply.
Yeah. And then you were quite proactive in terms of preparing for birth. Did that help to alleviate those concerns you had?
Yeah, I think it did.
Were they still?
Yeah, sorry. I think in the end, I was actually quite looking forward to the experience in some way. Like I definitely wanted to have a vaginal birth. I wanted to try for a natural birth. I wanted to try for a water birth. You know, I did want to do all of these. I wanted to birth naturally and in a positive way, I suppose. And I felt, I was looking forward to having this experience as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did any of the courses or like the education that you did any of it discuss those, like the birth stories that you'd heard, you know, those preconceived notions of those stories that we hear from our parents and all the rest? Did any of it tackle those, your concerns and your fears?
You know, I don't really think so. I feel like in terms of listening to birth stories in podcasts and things, I sort of would lean towards really positive birth stories rather than listening to traumatic ones, just because of where my headspace was at and how I wanted things to go. But if I think of all the research I did and things, everything was very focused on the birth, not on sort of postpartum recovery and things. And I don't, you know, it was more around, you know, risks of pain, you know, from epidurals, like the risk of, you know, injury from that, rather than like, I feel like it was more around informing you about the risks of, you know, sorry, I feel like I'm not.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So what you're trying to say is you feel that although you might have heard of the risks of, for example, instrumental delivery, you didn't actually realise those long-term effects potentially physically. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Like you just think about those immediate issues rather than how it might affect you in months and years to come.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, you're probably right. A lot of dialogue is probably around. Like it probably doesn't extrapolate it to those future issues because, again, they're so varied. And just because one person has a forceps delivery doesn't mean if you have two people with a forceps delivery, they might both have very different outcomes.
Yeah, so, that's true. Yeah, it's so individual, isn't it, your experience? And yet I do feel like there's a lot more education that women could receive while they're pregnant. I feel like there's a lot of not wanting to scare women and therefore not informing us of a lot of the things that you could expect postpartum. Yeah.
It's a tricky one. And it's always at the forefront of my mind. Like I'm helping women prepare their bodies for birth to help with their afterbirth recovery. But also you're not wanting, so it's a very fine line between being informed, which I'm hoping is empowering versus scaring. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk, let's go back to, I guess, the week and the days leading up to your birth.
Yeah, so I can remember sort of skipping along to my 38-week midwife appointment, having had no issues in the pregnancy, getting to that appointment and having they detected quite high blood pressure. So I can only remember it was reading 170. I don't remember what the bottom number was, but the midwife was quite concerned. So I was sent off to hospital for further monitoring. They put me on medication, sent me home. I had to go back in a few days to be checked again. So I just didn't think it was a big deal. I said to my husband, I'm on medication now. It'll be sorted. I don't have anything to worry about. But 3 days later, when I went back to the hospital to be checked, my blood pressure had actually gone up again. And so I was admitted into hospital that day. I was 38 plus 4 days.
And was it preeclampsia you had?
No. So they were quite confident I didn't have preeclampsia, and they continued testing me quite frequently. I was told by a doctor that if the pregnancy were to continue, then it would quite possibly develop into preeclampsia. But they were confident that it was just gestational hypertension. Yeah. So that was a bit of a weird experience, I think, because everything had been so fine throughout the pregnancy. I really wasn't expecting that to happen, and I was just like convinced that I would go over past full term.
The 40 weeks.
Yeah. I was just convinced that would happen. So when I was admitted, at 38 weeks, I wasn't prepared for that at all. Yeah, and so then I was induced at 38 plus 5 days. So that was an interesting experience, and quite I guess the birth ended up being quite long.
Yeah, so in the morning of the induction, I assumed you were induced in the morning?
It was about midday, actually. They were quite busy.
Okay,
There were a lot of women, giving birth at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And what did they do?
So the hospital that I was at, it's actually, I don't know how they go about it in Australia, but I know in London, even hospital to hospital seem to have different approaches to induction and different systems in place. So the hospital I was at inserted a pessary into my cervix, and I was told that would stay in for 24 hours. And then after that period of time, they would take it out, check me, see where things are at. And I was told most likely scenario is that they would then need to insert another pessary. They said generally the induction process would take about 48 hours. So I was kind of expecting it to take about two days. But once the pessary was inserted, I started having sort of like period pain cramps straight away. And within a few hours, I was having contractions, quite sort of just like not particularly intense ones. Yeah, so that things kind of kicked off quite quickly. And I remember a lot of the midwives saying, this is a really good sign. It's a good sign. Yeah, so I was using the TENS machine for pain relief, and they were I couldn't really sleep. So I was I remember in the middle of the night sort of asking for some pain relief, and I was given liquid morphine, which, I mean, it felt like the contractions had stopped. I remember saying to a midwife, they've stopped. And she said, they won't have stopped. You just won't be able to feel them while the pain relief is working. So I was able to get a little bit of sleep. But, the midwives kept sort of saying, it's a really good sign that you're having these contractions. I think by the morning they had really ramped up, and I was having – they weren't that intense, but I was having 1 minute long contractions every 2 minutes. So they were really, really frequent. But when the first pessary was taken out and I was checked, there'd been no change to my cervix. So a second one was put straight in, and I was then told I would have to wait another 24 hours before being checked again.
How were you feeling with that news?
I was sort of a little bit disappointed because I'd been having these frequent contractions. I thought maybe things might be moving, but I was told my cervix was facing back. It was long, and it hadn't opened at all. But I was I was expecting 48-hour process. So I thought, okay, well, I'd kind of accepted that that's how long it would take. With the second pessary, though, my contractions really ramped up. So they were still that same frequency, but they were much more intense. So I really wasn't getting any sleep. I was also in a shared room. I don't know, I didn't mention this earlier, but I was in a room with 3 other women who had all been induced. So that was kind of a bit weird as well. I was having these contractions. Everyone could hear what everyone was, was going on for each of us. So that was all a bit uncomfortable, I suppose.
Were you chatting to each other? Or?
No, we were all sort of behind in our own beds behind a curtain. And there wasn't any chat at all. Yeah. So I guess I continued contracting for another 24 hours. I was getting pretty exhausted. They were giving me liquid morphine. I think every 6 hours I was able to have a top up of that. And that was kind of allowing me to get a couple of hours sleep. But the midwives were saying it was a really good sign that I was contracting like I was. So I was in my head, I really thought things will be moving along. But when I was checked again after that second 24-hour block, there was, again, no change in my cervix. And I just burst into tears. I just thought, well, that's just ridiculous, like I've been going through all of this for nothing. I was told that they would give me a break for 6 hours, they said, and then they would insert a gel into my cervix to try and move things along. But I just felt a bit done by that point. I just couldn't see how I could continue this process. So I spoke.
You must have been exhausted.
Yeah, I was honestly just absolutely exhausted. Yeah, so the decision was made to book me in for a cesarean. They said they considered the induction failed, and I was booked in for a cesarean for the next morning at 9 a.m. So this decision was made probably about 6 p.m. On like Thursday. So I would have been, I think, 39 weeks and 1 day, I think, if that's consistent with what I said before. I'm pretty sure that's where I was at. Yeah. Yeah, so the decision was made. The pessary was taken out. I was continuing to have contractions, but they sort of calmed down a little bit. They weren't as frequent, but they were still I would say they were sort of similar intensity, just not as frequent.
And how did you feel knowing that the cesarean was booked the next morning?
I was disappointed. I sort of said to my husband, it's not what I wanted, but at the same time, I just felt I couldn't keep going through this induction process. I sort of just wanted the baby out. I was just tired and a bit fed up. So I was definitely a bit disappointed, but at the same time accepting that that's how things were going to go. So my husband went home for the night. I just kind of relaxed in my bed. I went for sort of a little stroll around the hospital, had a few more sort of big-ish contractions, didn't really think anything of it. And then all of a sudden, at about 8 p.m, my waters just popped. I just felt this sort of pop, and they broke. And then with that, I started having the most intense contractions. Like it went from like 2 to 10. So I think they'd actually moved me to a different ward. So I think all the midwives there were kind of running around thinking I was about to give birth by the noises I was making. They were they were panicking and trying to sort of find someone to take me back down to the birthing suite quite quickly. I was 4 centimetres dilated when I was checked, but I'm pretty sure she was back to back, which is why I was probably making these quite intense noises. The contractions were really painful, and I suppose that was why. Yeah, so that was quite dramatic, I guess.
And were they able to get you back to the birthing suite?
Yeah, they did. They got me straight down. I got into a room. My midwife came in, checked me over 4 centimetres dilated. I asked for an epidural then and there, but I had to wait quite a while. They were really busy. And apparently they kept telling me, everyone wants epidurals tonight. So I think I ended up waiting about 5 hours before I was able to get one. So I was just on the gas and air in the interim.
And had your partner come back to the hospital at this stage?
He got there quite quickly. So we didn't live too far from the hospital, so that was fine. I found the contractions quite intense. I was really exhausted, I guess. I'd been in hospital for a couple of nights by that point, having constant monitoring in a shared room. I was pretty exhausted. So the epidural was a big help. I was able to get some sleep. I think I had the epidural about midnight. So, I was able to get some sleep. They checked me at 6 a.m. and I was 10 centimetres dilated at that point. And they said they would give it 2 hours to allow the contractions to push the baby further down. And at 8 a.m. they came in and I started pushing. So given I had the epidural, I didn't want to birth on my back, but that's how I was laying when I started pushing. And to be honest, I felt kind of okay about that at the time. I guess I was just tired and I didn't really feel like trying to move into another position. I had quite a long pushing stage, so I didn't realise this until quite recently, but I didn't realize it was a long pushing stage, but it was about an hour and a half, but she wasn't really coming out. So I had an episiotomy and von Schuss delivery. Yeah.
And was that 1.5 hours from the start of pushing to the birth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how did you, when you finally started pushing, like how did you find that transition to pushing phase? Or was it, how was the epidural affecting your sensation? Like how did you find it?
Yeah, I think it definitely was affecting my sensation. I could feel the midwife sort of used her fingers to show me where to push to, because I didn't realize that you don't just push, if that makes sense. Like you do actually have to target your pushing. And I was able to feel, where to push to. And I could feel, when the doctor came in and used the von Schuss and everything, I could feel that. But there was definitely a lack of sensation there. I had no urge to push at all. And I don't really know, but I wonder if that affected my ability to push as well. I'm not too sure, but yeah.
Yeah. So the baby's born.
Mm.
Did you know what it was going to be?
No, we didn't know the gender, so that was a nice surprise. Yeah, she came out quite quickly. Once they put the vacuum on, they were just telling me to push, and I can remember the midwife saying, "Oh, the head's out," and then next second she was on my chair. So she did actually she just kind of flew out then. Yeah, so my husband sort of announced the gender, and that was all good. Everything was good. We had skin to skin. I birthed the placenta, maybe within about half an hour. The cord was cut. Everything was pretty good. She latched straight away. Yeah, it was like a really beautiful, like lovely experience, actually. I have such nice memories of it. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah.
Despite having a really long lead up.
Yeah, really long lead up.
Yeah.
But I think, I wasn't thrilled about being booked in for a cesarean. So the fact that I was able to have this vaginal birth, like I really was just so happy. Yeah, and I still feel that way. I feel really positive about it. And I don't know, for me it felt like a really empowering experience. Yeah, so it was nice.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So mentioned off air, a couple of weeks passed relatively uneventfully. Is that right? Everything was going along well?
Yeah, everything was pretty. We went home within a day from the hospital. I did basically nothing for the first 2 weeks. My husband was off work. Very little happened. It's a weird time in your life because you're sort of physically trying to recover from this birth. I had stitches from the episiotomy and I was finding them quite painful. You've got this newborn baby. So it was all a bit exhausting, but quite wonderful as well. But yeah, we just really stayed home, didn't do much at all, which was really nice. But then my husband sort of returned to work after 2 weeks. And that's probably when I also started to feel a bit better in myself and started to up the ante a bit in what I was doing around the house. So, yeah, he went back to the office. I was home alone. We don't have any family around London. So I was just sort of home alone with this baby all day. And I did start, I think because I'd gone into hospital earlier than I anticipated, I'd had like a list of things I wanted to get done that didn't get done prior to the baby arriving. And so then I just decided that I would start to do those things. And I have like a bit of regret now looking back, but, I was like cleaning the oven and like batch cooking and just, I don't know why I was doing these things, but I just felt, I don't know, I just was. Yeah. So I really should have just been resting, but I felt like I needed to get these things done.
And then what happened?
Well, my mum and dad arrived it was a couple of days after Andrew went back to work. So I was doing all these things around the house. Mum and dad arrived. And then I sort of upped the ante then again with them. So they wanted to go out and about and do a few things. And I thought, I'll go along with them. And quite a few times I sort of thought, I've probably overdone it here. I should just be at home on the couch. But I think it was nice to get out as well. Like I wanted to be out and about. I always felt better for getting outside during the day. And it wasn't huge things, we're just sort of going to the park or the next suburb over or things like that. And I guess doing those things kind of built my confidence a little bit. So then from there, I started taking our dog for a walk in the park by myself. I'd leave the baby home with my mum and I'd take him to the park. So by this point, I'm about 3 weeks post giving birth. And then I reckon she was about 4 weeks old and my husband was going to take our dog for a walk. And I said, I'd been testing out the baby carrier around the house. And I thought, I'll put the baby in the carrier and I'll come for a walk with you. And I actually said to him, I was like, we shouldn't go for more than sort of half an hour. I said, I think that's like my limit. But it was a really nice day. So it was sort of like coming into summer over here. Half an hour came and went. We were still in the park. And I said, it's probably time to head back to the car now. And I can vividly remember walking back to the car. We were sort of walking downhill and I just felt something sort of drop inside my vagina. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like what is that? And I knew about prolapse, and I'd sort of thought I knew a lot about it, but turns out I really didn't. Anyway, I sort of thought to myself, I reckon that's what that is. And yeah, that's what that is. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'd overdone it basically. Well, I got home and I sort of said to my husband, something's wrong, like something feels wrong. And I sort of went up to the bathroom and got a mirror out and tried to have a look. But I mean, I was still kind of recovering and I didn't really know what I was looking at really. So that didn't confirm anything for me. But I'd heard women talk about their experience with prolapse before. I'd heard about the symptoms of feeling a bulge in your vagina, which is exactly what I could feel. So I really was convinced that that's what had happened to me. And I was pretty upset. Like there were a lot of tears. I sort of thought it was a pretty big deal. It didn't feel great. I think that's the other thing. You can sort of, you're constantly thinking about it and feeling it.
Yeah.
So look, I was sort of a bit upset, but also a bit like, well, I just have to figure out what this is and deal with it as well. So I made a physio. Well, I already had a women's physio appointment scheduled for 7 weeks postpartum anyway. So I just thought, well, I'll just sit tight, wait for that and do really very little between now and then. Yeah, so I went along to that appointment and it's called a mummy MOT over here. I don't know if that's something. No, I don't think MOT is very it's like a car service term in the UK. So a mummy MOT is basically getting your whole body checked over.
Your body service.
Postpartum, it's yeah. So I was booked in for one of those. So they check your abdominal muscles and your pelvic floor, basically. Yeah. Yeah. So I had.
What did she?
Yeah, I had an internal check of my pelvic floor and she confirmed I did have a prolapse. So she diagnosed me with a grade 1 anterior wall prolapse. So bladder. Yeah. Just
the grade 1.
Yeah, grade 1. I'm still surprised by that because, to be honest, my symptoms have felt a lot more intense than I would have thought a grade 1 would feel.
I think and were you assessed lying down?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes the grading can change. Like if you were to do a standing pelvic floor assessment, she might have noticed a grade 2.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because that's with gravity. Yeah, so it can change also depending on what time of day. Like if you went in the morning and perhaps you get your symptoms mostly at night time, it might become a grade 2 towards the evening when you've been up and about all day.
Oh, okay. So you can sort of...
Can fluctuate.
I didn't realise that. I thought you had a grade and that was it.
Well, the prolapse doesn't fluctuate, but the assessment can based on the time of day and whether or not it's under load of gravity.
Yeah. I have considered and I did consider for a while getting a second opinion because I really did think that it was more severe than a grade 1. But as time has gone on and things have improved, I just haven't felt the need to do that. Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting experience having a prolapse. I sort of following the diagnosis, my parents were still here visiting when I went through all of that. And I was feeling quite good when I had them around. But as soon as they went home, I fell into quite a deep depression over the whole thing because, it's not a nice thing. You can really feel it. I mean, I could feel it all the time, like sitting down. I can't really remember if I could feel it when I was lying down. I certainly can't now, but I just felt like I could feel it all the time. But I was also really hyper aware of it. So I was thinking about it all the time. And then I sort of dove really deep into prolapse research. So then I was also following all these accounts on Instagram and listening to all these podcast interviews all day. It was sort of all I could think about. And I don't think that was helping my mindset at the time.
And for those listening, I think that's really common because if you're leaking, it sort of doesn't, sure, it might be a bit of inconvenience, but you can pop a pad in or get special undies and it doesn't really feel any different if you're accidentally leaking. Whereas with a prolapse, that sensation, as you said, can be there all the time and it can be at the forefront of your mind. And there's been some research coming out that feeling of heaviness and prolapse is a bigger barrier to exercising than leaking. The leaking, you can sort of, pop something on, sort of ignore it to a certain extent. Not always, and I'm not downplaying incontinence, but prolapse symptoms can definitely affect the mind as well, as you say.
Yeah.
Or they both can, but
Of course, yeah. No, I really felt that because I just stopped doing anything. I wasn't even leaving the house really to go for short walks because it was just really affecting me. Terrified of making things worse. Even though the physio had said, you can do Pilates, walking's great. Oh, one thing I should have mentioned was that the physio pointed out to me, I mean, I was baby wearing for too long on a walk 4 weeks after giving birth, which I really did not know that I shouldn't be doing that. It seems silly now, especially with what I know about pelvic floor now. But at the time, I just thought that was a completely okay thing to do. But she pointed out that I was walking downhill when it happened. And she said the chances, she said, do you think you were sort of stomping your feet as you were walking maybe too fast down a hill? And I sort of thought, well, I probably really was, so it's sort of like that impact that wouldn't have helped matters at all. So, but going back, I really just stopped doing anything at all. And, then that's not going to help your mental health either. So it's sort of a bit of a cycle.
Here I am putting my physio hat on. Can I just say though, Emily, don't beat yourself up about it because it's nothing to say that what you did caused anything. The issue was caused during childbirth.
Yeah.
Sure, what you did might have unmasked some symptoms, but it didn't necessarily, we don't know, but it didn't necessarily what you were doing, going for a walk, baby wearing, walking downhill, didn't necessarily cause the prolapse.
Yeah.
It was a childbirth that did that.
Exactly,
it's just when it became symptomatic, was it 4 weeks postpartum? Was it when you returned to running, 9 months postpartum? Was it when you reach menopause, when you're 50?
Yeah.
So don't beat yourself up is all I'm trying to say.
No, that's such a good thing to say because I think from what I hear is a lot of women self-blame for this injury that, if you didn't have a baby, you wouldn't have this injury. So you're right. It's not, I didn't do anything to cause it. I gave birth and that's, but it is a bit of a conflict. Sometimes I do still think God, if I hadn't gone for that walk, would I be where I am today? But then I'm still a little bit up and down with it. But I think that's a really common narrative that women blame themselves for this.
We always blame ourselves. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
We always blame ourselves. But please don't because there's so many if only, coulda, woulda, all the rest. And at the end of the day, you gave birth, you did have a longer pushing phase slightly, but still 1.5, it's still on the border of is it actually considered a long pushing phase? Some people consider there's a bit with the research, it's not yet defined what a long pushing phase is. It could be 1.5, but it also in the research it's discussed 2 hours. So, it's not necessarily
considered.
So,
it is. No,
it's not never nice to have a prolapse,
Yeah.
but I'd love to know some treatment now. Like, what did the physio suggest moving forwards?
Look, the physio's been, every time I see her, I sort of think that she should be making a bigger deal about this thing, but she's so relaxed about it. And she's like, I expected that, I think I had read somewhere that a really high percentage of women within if they do pelvic floor exercises 3 times a day, to the point of, I don't want to use the word exhaustion, to the point of fatigue.
Muscle fatigue.
Yeah, muscle fatigue. That, a high percentage of women report having no symptoms of their prolapse after 3 to 5 months. So I had this in my head. I was like, okay, 3 months, I'll keep at it. But 3 months came and went, and I was still having symptoms, and I was sort of a bit down about that. And I went to see her and the physio, and she just said, you just need to manage your symptoms now. Like, you need to get on with your life. You need to do the things that you enjoy. And I was like, yeah, I really do. Prior to that, I had started going to some Pilates and yoga classes. I'm up to the ante now. Like, I've started to go. It's still a postnatal class, but I've started to do sort of strength and conditioning. And like, I was looking at your online videos, and you've got a lot of really great classes, because I do like, I want to exercise and feel fit again and get a sweat up. I always really enjoy doing stuff like that. So I've started to do those things, and my prolapse symptoms just improve and improve constantly. Did get my period back at about, Edith was like 4 months to the day, and I'm breastfeeding. I was furious. I was just like, this is too soon. However, it has, I think, improved my symptoms significantly.
Fantastic.
So I'm quite grateful for having my period back now. So I'm really having barely any symptoms at all now. So that's about fantastic. 4 months since the prolapse happened that I'm no longer, I'm still having some symptoms, but they're minimal. I don't think about it like I used to. It's gotten much, much better. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. And for those who are listening, like Emily, what you said, there is some great research showing that pelvic floor exercises might help reduce symptoms of a prolapse, but it also does depend what degree the prolapse is. So for those who are symptomatic and prolapse is bothering them, another option is potentially a pessary, where you pop it in the morning, go and do whatever exercises, workout you want. It helps you to become symptom-free, and then you might take it out at nighttime before you go to bed. So finding a physio that, not all physios will fit pessaries, so either finding a physio or an obstetrician who fits pessaries, or a gynecologist, might definitely be worth it. And for those that are listening, it's like sort of like a tampon. You put a tampon in, take it out, but it's made of silicone. There's different shapes available. Rings are really common, but nice and bendy, so you can be taught how to take it in and out. So that can be a really amazing one to help with symptom management whilst everything naturally recovers and you get stronger.
Yeah.
And I think that can help with that mental space as well, so you're not always feeling a bulge. And
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, you'll look into it, and maybe you could ask your physio about it, and she might know someone that she can recommend you see.
Yeah, I have actually been referred to see a gynecologist to get a pessary fitted through the NHS, which is the health system over here, but it's quite a lengthy wait, unfortunately. So I was chatting to my husband about going private in the interim, but my symptoms are feeling quite really, the last month have just improved so much that I'm feeling okay to hold out and wait. I think if I was down the track, wanting to return to running and things like that, I'll definitely have one in. I just think it would give me peace of mind as well, as hopefully improving any symptoms. So, yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but it's sounding like you're feeling quite positive about the future.
Oh, definitely. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Had you spoken
great.
To me 6 weeks ago, like, I don't think I was feeling that positive about it all. I was thinking I was going to have symptoms for the rest of my life, and, it was kind of bringing me down a little bit, but, I really, the more time goes on, the stronger I feel in my body, all over my body. So, and I think that just helps with the prolapse symptoms as well. And things just do keep improving, and I'm feeling quite positive absolutely about it now. Yeah.
You had birth outcomes that you weren't, obviously weren't favourable. 5.5 months later, you've sought treatment, you've done a lot of research, you've been doing a lot of exercises like pelvic floor exercises, excited to see you inside Fitness Mama. You've just joined up with that. So I'll be excited to, see how you go with all those workouts to help you get even stronger. And I'd love to know, touch base with us in a couple of months' time, once you've had the pessary, once you're feeling stronger, and I'd love to have a bit of an update.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I'd love that.
Amazing. Is there anything, before we wrap up, is there anything you might want to, any further last bit tips of advice that you'd like to impart on any pregnant or new mums who are listening today?
I don't know. I think if I think back to when I was pregnant, I wish I'd probably invested physically in myself a bit more than I did. I kind of just went with the flow of pregnancy rather than really, and I was very focused on the birth rather than really thinking about postpartum recovery, but also trying to understand. I wish I knew more about what your body physically goes through, not just during birth, but 9 months of growing and carrying a baby. It's quite significant. I don't think I even knew that your abdominal muscles separate, for example. And I also think we're not really informed about these things either, from midwives and things. So I think it's good to just do a bit of research and just invest in yourself physically, rest, try to listen to how you're feeling. I was definitely pushing myself too far, and even during the pregnancy I was as well. So I think, invest in yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And that's what I'm all about. And this podcast, and out of interest, Emily, and I'm just totally curiosity here. I know you mentioned you've listened to this podcast while you're pregnant.
Yeah.
I feel that everything you just mentioned then is everything I cover inside Fitness Mama and the podcast. But are there any podcast episodes that you, in hindsight, that I could create for you, that would have helped? Because I feel like I've got all that, but perhaps I don't.
No, you absolutely do. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I meant to say I had listened to a few of your episodes, but I was really early on in pregnancy at the time. And there was one where you talk about postpartum and you talk about increasing walking 5 minutes a week. And I remember saying to my husband, this is what we need to make sure I do after I have the baby. But I didn't re-listen. I wish I'd re-listened to a few of those podcasts I listened to in the early days, because I didn't remember a lot of the content in them. And in the, I was on cloud 9 after giving birth, and I just sort of thought, I don't know, it went out the window. Well,
that's good to know.
Yeah.
I think we don't, sometimes as well, we're only ready to hear it when we're ready to hear it. You're bombarded with so much information during pregnancy, you can't take on everything. So you might hear it, but then it's maybe the second time you hear it that you think, oh.
So true.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So, interesting to know. So if you do think of any episodes you'd like me to record, or anyone listening to today, please send me a message on Instagram at Fitness Mama. So Emily, thank you so much for sharing your story. I do really thank you for taking the time out. I know there is a big time difference, so it's your bedtime now.
Thank
you, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful to share.
Amazing. And come and give us an update in a few months.
Will do.
Speak to you soon.
Thanks.
And before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including how to access our 7-day free trial at fitnessmama.com/podcast. Have a fabulous day, everyone, and I look forward to you joining me very soon for another episode of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer: materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I'll see you soon.